Alright, here we go. Getting started. I gotta shut the window. I'll be right back. Alright, here we go. Let me bring up the new desktop. This is what I've been designing. I got this idea from, what was his name? I only met him once, but I certainly give him credit for it. But this is my version of what his idea is. So it's more comic book type desktop. So I filled in all the black. I took a comic book panel back there with the blue, green, and I used that for the desktop background, which I think for our site is more fitting because we're doing essentially a video comic book with our video novels. And I went and put all the little cutouts in there. I don't know where I'm going to exactly put the little so I like my cameras where they're at. That's normally where they're positioned, but thinking of lowering that down. Let me fix that now while I'm doing it. Thinking about it. Right there. So the cameras have always been that way, so I need to put the follow goals over. Make that smaller. Pretty much in the same position, right? Yeah. Here we go. I'll show you. Bring that up. Here we go. So, oh, I gotta turn on iTunes. Wait for that to start up. Well, it's typical. No one was talking loud, and as soon as I turned the cameras on, all of a sudden it has a need to talk really loud. It's human nature. what I do here is I'm setting up the graphics so that they show up on the panel there on the right there, you'll see. But I don't want it to play through because I need this video clip for our highlight video and I don't want it to be muted out, so I muted it. People can hear you talking! People have nothing to say. As soon as the camera comes on, all of a sudden everybody's got something to say. Okay, let me fix one of the downfalls of streaming out of your house is you have people that are all of a sudden they have lack of self-control and start acting like a fool. You might experience this if you're streaming or new to streaming, where it's all quiet, no one says anything, neighbor doesn't go start up his car for some reason, like guy across the street never revs his engine up, but as soon as you turn the camera on, he's revving his engine up. Okay, see, and that's how we get the little iTunes thing there on the side. Look at that, see? Looks good. And I borrowed this idea. I believe his name is Fanatic Games, Fanatic TV. I'll look it up. But I should have looked it up when Twitch was up. Yeah. So I got my DJ label there. I put the news feed at the bottom. I got the follower list down there below the little fan shake. Why I wanted to move that little banner over and drop the cameras down a little was I wanted to put the flags back up because I like our flags. I think they're cool. So let me add those while I'm thinking about it. No time like the present. Just gotta remember where I put them. Got this huge list of the flags. Dun, dun. Yeah, looks good. What does it look like? Yeah. How's that? Look at that. The flag, got the US flag and the Florida state flag up there. Florida, that's right. How's that? Oh, looks good. Got their little warning label up there. It's kind of cool. Adults only. More than likely you put a warning label up there like that, it's when people come. Oh, let's see what's over there. Okay, so let's get going. Our stuff. And those of you that are just joining us, we started a new clip. Today is the 11th of May, 2019. It's 23 minutes after 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern Daylight Savings Time. I'm Megaman on the first, and this is fan fiction here on Chronicles of Earth 9. I had an idea for a commercial for Chronicles of Earth 9, but still putting the ideas together. The little screenplay for it. But what is Chronicles of Earth 9, you ask? Dun. We bring up our notepad is what we need. Where is it? There we go. So I bring up our Google Chrome. Should probably pause iTunes, huh? Now tonight I have to fit, when we do the grind, I'm going to have to fit the PlayStation window in there. The plate's a little bit larger than our other screen, but by making the plate that big and having a clean plate, meaning none of the graphics are on top of it, it makes it easy for people to see, but also it standardizes the size of the frame. So if you're trying to control for your memory when you're streaming, you limit the size of that canvas, and that pretty much limits your memory, so it won't be all over the place with a large image. Space economy there. Needed YouTube is what we needed, right? Wait for that to load up. Of course, the phone rings. Yay. Though the mic's not picking it up according to that. I got the filters turned on, so it should mute all that out. So here we are. Let me bring up the Patreon page while I'm thinking about it. If you want to become a Patreon subscriber, please, this is the link to there. I put one below the channel here. Down there, I put a button down there for you. We also have a Discord, so you could join that if you want. Our Discord is tiny, but it's available. It's available. Yes, I am 18 years older. Wait for it to get done. Here's our Patreon page. So far we don't have any donors, but hopefully that will change. I don't know if that's true because we don't have any 12 Patreon only post. So still working on that, but that's the link to Patreon. Let's get back. I put chapter 2 of Cathexis up yesterday. I worked on it in the morning, so we can go ahead and review that. So
Chapter 2, Themis's Journal. The events recorded in this.
Let me pause that. Put that up. Make this bigger. So, in the novel forms, I've reduced them down to chapter size, so they're only 12,000 word chapters. they can be over 12,000 words. Like the first chapter for book 20, which is the story of Diana, it's 14,000 words. So, but you try to shoot with 12,000 word. That makes it about an hour and 10 minutes, roughly. So maybe a little longer than that, but it allows people to take the novel in chunks. And then as far as storing it on YouTube, it's easier to store it when it doesn't take as long to upload. And two, it's easier for people to sort through the book, especially if they say read one part of the book. They can just go straight to chapter 2 or chapter 3. You don't have to sit through the entire book and scan all the way into chapter 2. Okay, so let's review it here.
This journal are the true accounts as I have remembered them. Where
Sure
the
it's not
events are
echoing.
recollections of my own eyewitness account, I have provided them. Where the events are clarifications of facts that I have learned after their occurrence, I have edited the record accordingly. I guess that the best place to start, or the first place to start about these.
Let me pause. I gotta change out the stream information. Now I'm thinking about it. Yeah. Let me bring up the chat stuff in case someone wants to talk to us. Here we go. Go ahead and test it out. So we put some words over there on the right side of the screen there. There it goes. See how it shows up in that little speech bubble there? So let's see, we're high technology here. High technology. And I want to do something before we go on. I need to bring up I need to put the part that shows up with if people follow, it hits, the little thing pops up, congratulations, you know. I'm gonna put there now, your little yellow spot there between the camera and the flags. That'd be a pretty good spot. I believe it's called a browser thing. Streamlab alerts. There it is. There we go. Should pop up in that little thing there. Someone should hit that button and move that over. Okay, there we go. Right, let's get back to reviewing the novel. This guy with his motorcycle.
These series of events is to give some exposition about my powers. Why it is important to understand these phenomena is that many of my powers are internal to my own mind, so, from a linear perspective, it will be necessary and sufficient to understand these means at my disposal. Before getting into that, I suppose it would be proper to tell part of the story first. Let's see, I had returned to my home in Theme Skira to rest and to relax. Perhaps, if I was lucky, find a date and attend a show. As I had walked through the door, to my surprise, my sister, Nemesis, had been waiting for me. She had not been alone. Accompanying her was God Eros. Good evening, Nemesis, I said. I greeted her with a kiss on the cheeks. Good evening, Eros, I said. I greeted him with a kiss on the cheeks. Nemesis smiled and replied, good evening, My dear sister, might I have a word with you? Alone. She had seemed in such earnest that I agreed to her wishes. Keep yourself entertained, Eros. We will go into the kitchen and talk, I said. Thank you, Themis, Eros said. He stood up and bowed to me. At first, I thought his behavior had been strange, but I did not think much about it. My sister and I went into the next room. Once we were in the kitchen, I offered to make my sister some coffee. Can I offer you some coffee, Nemesis? I said. Yes, I would like some coffee. Thank you, she said. I will make the coffee, and you can explain to me what you came here to say. I said. Okay, she replied. As Nemesis made herself comfortable at the kitchen table, I had begun to heat up the water to make the coffee. As I had stated before, the need for the exposition of my internal powers is necessary at this point. My sister and I are what the immortals refer to as primordial gods. Primordial gods are the entities that control basic forces of the multiverse. Why were we chosen to be the custodians of cosmic forces in nature? Only the Creator knows. In my case, my primordial power is to govern over divine justice, or what the Hellenes, the Greeks, refer to as that which is put in place. My sister's primordial power is to govern over divine retribution, or what the Hellenes refer to as to give what is due. In our case, we both have governed over these forces for 13 billion years. By mortal standards, God Eros is another primordial god, and he governs over the force of desire or future dreams. His mother, goddess Aphrodite, she governs over how people relate to each other. In pagan terms, she governs over the spirit of life over the cross of matter. Complement to goddess Aphrodite, god Ares governs over the individual's place in the universe. In pagan terms, he governs over the cross of matter over the spirit of life. How does this relate to the story? You see, as I have been talking to my sister, Nemesis, mental images of the future have streamed through my mind. The way this works for me is my mind develops several streams at one time. Each stream is a possible future. This is like how Athenata's truth vision works, but her power streams events that have already occurred in space and in time. My future vision or clairvoyance are not absolute certainties. They are at best probabilities. As I have stated, mental images of two possible futures streamed through my mind. What future will come? This will not be by my will alone. As goddess of nature, our wills are not our own. This is where we are different from mortals and meta-humans. God Zeus gave mortals free will when he made a deal with Titan Prometheus, which is one of the reasons why they die in about 100 years. For the rest of us immortals, we have a limited will. Our powers are governed by individual gods, but they affect each of us in a symphony. So, before my
Pause it there for a minute. One thing I was thinking of doing, and I was mainly thinking about it today, was one of the ways that we're going to distinguish Athenata's power is, I think it should be important that even in the recent book that we're working on, where they thought she's been dead for 5 years, 10 years in some respect, and Donna Troy takes over as Wonder Woman, I think we're going to make it to where the other Amazons aren't, they're angels, but they don't have her empathy power, you don't have her truth vision, which is a key component to what makes her Wonder Woman. And I'm not going to say we're going to make it to where Donna, she's very successful as Wonder Woman, but she has a harder time than Athenata has at it, because she doesn't have empathy power. She doesn't have her truth power, so she has to sort of find another way to do the job. And Drusilla and Donna are a lot younger than Athenata, so their powers aren't as strong, but they're more geared for like being a tank, being a damage dealer, and they're not really a healer. And in our story, Diana is one of the most powerful healers in the world. And so what happens is the Amazons start incorporating seers into their ranks, where, because normally what Athenata would do is she would go to people at night as an angel, come to them, and that's how she would absorb their dark energy. So when Donna starts doing this, she doesn't have that ability. So what they end up doing is, through their lasso, they can call on their seer, and with the power of the 4 goddesses in the lasso, the goddesses are the one that actually determine what they do, and she's just the one who sort of is charged with observing that person or their case, basically. And lost my train of thought. But Donna Troy is going to struggle, and that's when you get into the 2013 script that I wrote. You start seeing the Seers, and they're really just medics, combat medics that go along with the Amazons who don't have healing ability. And the Seers they're basically field medics that go out, and some of them have healing ability, but they're not as strong as Athenata. And Hippolyta slowly starts to realize that even Hippolyta doesn't have the ability to heal. Like, she has her own internal healing ability. You know, all the Amazons have that. But empathy allows you to bestow that onto other people, and that's what Diana has. And so, like, when Diana, people like rape her in the story and stuff, because her empathy is passive, she ends up absorbing all their dark energy. And the person sort of loses their aggressiveness out of that. And that's what eventually happened to Darkseid. And in the first fight that they had, Athenata almost killed him. But he sort of had some clarity moment. And he sort of got rid of her. And then and that's when people took notice that he could be beaten. And then so that's one of the things that we're pointing out here in the story, and I kind of really thought about today. And this story is not really necessary at chapter 2 of the story to point that out, but this is sort of what's going on the line. We need to remind the audience why Diana is different than the other Amazons. What makes her special? Why is she the champion? These other people aren't. And it's really, they just don't have the right combination of powers, and they don't have it to the same degree that she has. So let's continue on.
My sister had gone about her desire to help Eros and I enjoy intercourse together. I had been made aware of this probable future. My reasons for not dismissing my sister's plan outright, I must explain after the entire story plays out. I suppose that deep down inside, I knew that this would be fun. After some time, the water was heated up and the coffee started brewing in the carafe. Do go on, Nemesis. Why are you and Eros here? I asked. Well, dear sister, I had been walking in the woods by the house when I ran into Eros sitting at the overlook by our house. I made some inquiries, and he told me that he had fallen in love with you, she said. I smiled and giggled like a teenager. I am not sure why I did. Me? Why would Eros fall in love with me? I asked. Dear sister, I know you have a big heart, but you take for granted just how powerful you and those mesmerizing blue eyes are, she said. Go on, I said. Eros told me that you and he had gone to a party some time ago, and that you two had danced and had talked together, and sometime after that, he developed a teenage crush on you. He told me that he had felt silly about the whole affair. He said that Psyche told him to follow his heart, she said. And that is when you told him the whole thing about unlike terms and age, I said. Yes, she said. She had looked in my eyes. Was I wrong, dear sister? She asked. No, you were not wrong. I know that your heart was in the right place, I said. So, what do I do now, Nemesis? I asked. I am sure that after 13 billion years, you know how the game works, Themis, she said. Not that I don't know the answer, dear sister, but let me guess. A show, a dinner, and then he feeds me full of chocolate. Then I get high and he pumps me full of his godhood, I said jokingly. I think you covered all the bases, dear sister, but just don't block home plate. Men these days just are not into the cock blocking, she said. Always the voice of reality, Nemesis, I said jokingly. I had paused for the moment and thought about Athenata. I know that look, Themis, you are concerned that your affair with Eros will interfere with your work with Athenata. Nemesis said. I am concerned, dear sister. She is on an important assignment for Athena right now. She must find a subject named Saline Kyle and determine if she can be saved. I said. You and she are always working for Athena. I think Athena forgets that she, Athena, works for you, Dear sister, Nemesis said, well, to be fair, Athenata works for all of us. The poor girl always having to let people rape her and subject her to such cruelty. She had been given all that power and all that responsibility, yet, her will is not her own either. It saddens me to witness all the true nature that Athenata must endure, but, I guess that intercourse.
What they're discussing here, the two sisters, they're primordial gods, and they're 13 billion years old in the story, and they're twins. Now, in the true mythology, Nemesis and Themis are not twins. Nemesis is an offspring of Gaia, I believe, and Themis is an offspring of Chaos, I believe. But in our fiction, we made them twin sisters, mainly because they're tied to the lasso, and Hestia is the last goddess. And both these have very similar duties in the cosmos, whereas Themis is the far-seeing person. She has foresight and clairvoyance. Nemesis sees the past, and it's a little different than Athenata's truth vision. Athenata, she sees the past because she sees the truth, but she sees the absolute truth, whereas Nemesis has the ability to misinterpret. Like if she sees the past, she can kind of interpret it on her own, whereas with the Athenata, she sees the absolute truth and everything. So she can't be fooled in that sense. But part of Athenata's weakness is she can choose to believe what she wants or not want to believe if she wants to, even though she does see the truth. Sometimes, even if the truth is staring you in the face, a lot of people don't act on it or don't want to believe it. But Athenata struggles with it a lot in the story. Although, for the most part, she gets it right. She struggles with that power. And then, and she struggles with it in a way that how much does she reveal to people versus not reveal to people? Because sometimes the truth can be more painful than the fantasy that people want to believe. So what they call belief and reality. So Athenata has more about reality, where Nemesis, her job is to bestow retribution onto people who have wronged other people. She's the collector. And so, and through Athenata, when her eyes changes colors, when they're blue, she's basically transmitting Themis, channeling Themis through her. When she turns red, she's channeling Nemesis's power. And I kind of want to have her pink eyes when she's channeling Hestia, because Hestia is the fire. And the three goddesses represent different aspects of time, what they call water element, which is Themis represents the past, Hestia represents the present or the moment, and Nemesis is the past, Themis is the future, desire, and Nemesis represents, or Hestia represents the moment. And she's going to be introduced in this story, later on in a story. But for now, if you've read the 3 previous books to this, when we first meet Themis in the story, she's the lasso and she's talking. And the lasso's animated. You don't really know if it's a real person. You kind of get the sense that she's a person or the way she's talking. But in the second book, you actually shows that she is a person. And she's walking around. So in this story, I thought it was important to show all the different aspects of the lasso, with the 4 goddesses, the 4th one being Athenata. Athenata is sort of the neutral person. She's the one that actually carries out the acts in the other 3 goddesses' name. And that's sort of what makes Wonder Woman in our story. She's the only one that has the ability to, and what makes her different than everybody else is she has so much control over her powers that she exercises, and that makes her unique in the story. it's one reason that doesn't make her power hungry or sort of let me take over. I can do it better than you can kind of. Because she has a very neutral demeanor, and now Nemesis is not neutral. Themis isn't neutral, and Hestia isn't neutral. So, and they all have different personalities. So in this story, we get to see Nemesis more in the story. And Themis goes off and has this, basically, she's sort of the centering character in the story. She's the one that sort of goes off and has this normal relationship with this guy, Eros. In our story, we've changed Aphrodite and Eros. In some mythologies, Eros is the son of Aphrodite. But in our mythos, going forward, we made both Aphrodite and Eros the primordial children of Chaos. Chaos is the mother goddess of everything in this universe. And she's the eldest of all the gods in the whole story. So we meet her later on in book 5, when we book 5 is sort of a backstory to how Diana became who she is. And I was working on that today, and I'm going to have that up probably by the end of the weekend, if not tomorrow or tonight. Definitely by Monday, I'll have it up in book form. But what's going on here, though, is we're getting to see that Nemesis is going to be working with Diana, and Nemesis is a little darker. And this is a chance in the story to explore the difference between a dark character and an evil character. And our heroes are going to be split basically in 2 parts. There's actually 3 main stories going on. You have the stuff going on with Hippolyta and her story arc. And you have the stuff going on with Dr. Psycho. And then you have the other part of the story going on with Helmet Striker. And the heroes in this story aren't really in an active role in the story, except for Hippolyta. Hippolyta's the only one sort of actively seeking out a quest, whereas the other ones are sort of passively waiting for the villains to do something because they thwarted their plans in the last book with Solomon Grundy. So now they're kind of like, well, what do we do next kind of strategy. They're basically prepping for the next. But during all this, the Wayne Foundation is hosting this ball. So, and this ties up our March of Dimes. In our story, Athenata is a long-time donator of the March of Dimes. The March of Dimes started in like 1942, 43. In our story, we're saying they started in 1943, and they were started by Franklin Roosevelt. March of Dimes. He had polio. He was very concerned with children and disabilities, and that's sort of what the March of Dimes is about. I know of the March of Dimes mainly because they deal with premature people. I was premature. That's kind of why I like them as a charity. And then so our promotion of that is in this story, and she becomes a lifelong member of the March of Dimes. And this is the point in the story where she does. That's coming along in chapter 3, chapter 4. And chapter 6 is when the ball occurs. So that's about the midway point of the story. And so there's a lot of story between here and there. And I like Nemesis as a character. I think she's kind of cool as a character. And it's always important to remember in our stories, no character in the story is sort of this is a hero, this is a villain. They're simply just people who are tasked with either self-motivation or someone else has tasked them to achieve something. And so how they go about achieving those things is up to them, really, in the story. And then this is the first story where we're going to have meta-humans sort of in the story, and that's going to be why we have Donna Troy, Drusilla, and then Donna, Drusilla, Martian Manhunter in The Flash, along with Alan in the story. But Alan's going to be working more with Elizabeth. We're going to dive deeper into the Wayne Foundation in the story, Wayne Enterprises, and there's stuff going on in that company that Elizabeth is going to become a stronger character in the story. In the last book, Elizabeth was sort of a weak character, but in this story is where she starts coming back as a strong character. And then Etta is sort of like Themis. She's exploring her roots, and she ends up in this relationship with this guy. And it's not like they're not dating or anything, they're just having sex basically with her horse trainer guy. And then the dude's daughter finds out because her mother died. And then the daughter's like the same age as Etta, or younger. Or actually, I want to make the daughter 25, so Etta's 23 in the story. So, and then they have sort of a affair. The daughter's like, "Oh, you're sleeping with my dad? All right." So the daughter checks out the dad's little hussy. It ends up being Etta. And then, so it sets up the end of the story. So here we go.
Force is the only true way that people reveal themselves, I said. Nemesis had walked behind me and gave me a hug. Yes, but even Athenata is letting her man, Steve, lay into her tonight. Dear sister, how she loves that mortal, she said. I smiled. Do not misunderstand me, Themis. The work you do is important for the cosmos, but even a goddess needs to get laid occasionally, she said. I chuckled. And besides, if she should call on you, I can take your place. You do remember that the lasso of truth binds both of us to Athenata. You determine who she will save, and I determine who she will slay. Dear sister, she said. I know, I said. I paused for a moment. Perhaps we should go talk with Eros. The poor guy has been waiting patiently for us in the other room. Maybe if he plays us right, we can get him to have sex with the both of us, I said jokingly. Nemesis laughed. It has been some time since we tagged team a fellow god. I guess that is one of the benefits of being a twin, Nemesis said, joking back. Prior to walking out to the living room, I had put together a tray with some cheese, crackers, and coffee. Nemesis led the way out to the living room where we both had joined Eros. I trust that you are comfortable, Eros, I said. He stood up. Yes, Themis, I am very comfortable, he said, smiling. Well, look at the time. I am going to go for a walk and leave you two to talk together, Nemesis said. I smiled and waved goodbye to Nemesis as she left the house. Eros and I sat on the sofa together. Nemesis has told me that you have fallen in love with me, Eros, I said. He looked away bashfully. I smiled. It is okay, Eros. Knowing that fact does not bother me, I said. He turned back to look at me. Thank you, Themis. Moments like these can be full of anxiety for a fellow, you know, he said. I took his hands into my hands. It is okay, Eros. You can talk to me, I said. Where should I begin? My heart is racing 1,000 times a minute. You would think the god of desire and love would be quite calm at a time like this, he said. It is okay, Eros. Just take it one step at a time, I said. He took my hands into his hands. For some time now, Themis, I have had you on my mind. I know that a mental obsession does not give me any reason or right to bother you with such nonsense, but I feel that talking with you about it would be the best course of action for me, he said. I guess that is better than drugging the girl and tricking her into bed, I said jokingly. He chuckled. Yes, Nemesis said that was a possible course of action, but the thought of doing that to you pains my heart, Themis. I don't want to hurt you or dupe you into liking me, he said. His words had caused me to become teary-eyed. Now look, I made you cry, he said sadly. No, oh no, Eros, as I wiped my eyes. These are good tears. They mean that I care for you too, I said. I smiled. The only question now is, do we go with the feeling or do we not go with the feeling, I said. He had looked concerned. Well, Themis, what are your feelings now? He asked. I smiled. To be honest, Eros, my feelings are not telling me no, if you get my meaning, I said. He had seemed to find joy in my answer, and stood up. Well, Miss Themis, would you like to go to a dance with me tonight? He asked. I smiled and laughed. Sure, I would love to go to a dance with you, Mr. Eros, I said. What is the theme? I asked. I think it is 19th century Knight to Knight. He said. You mean with those tight corsets and large dresses? I asked. Yes, you would look so attractive in that outfit, Themis, he said. And, are you implying that I am not attractive now, Eros? I said jokingly. This had seemed to confuse him and send his anxiety into overdrive. I didn't offend you, Miss Themis, did I? He asked. I smiled. No, you didn't offend me, Eros. I was just trying to get into the spirit. It is 1943 and mortal women have the right to vote now, I said. To help give Eros some confidence, I had given him a kiss on the cheeks, and, in return, he had kissed my hand. For the time being, we both parted our ways so that he could go get ready for the dance, and I could go get ready for the dance. Diana's Journal, Thursday, December 16, 1943, 6 o'clock in the morning. The morning had seemed to come early. Today, my body was still sore from my encounter with Solomon Grundy. Cyrus Gold, from yesterday morning. Quickly,
Okay, it's important to understand in this chapter. Chapter 1 was more of the recap for the people that didn't read the previous book. Who are all these people and why should we care about them? And it's sort of, here's where they are in the moment. Because as you know, if you read the other book, this book starts exactly right where the other book left off. I mean, there's, bam, about an hour in time. It's the only difference. So now we're dealing with the actual plot. And at this point in the story, we're gonna, chapters 2 main function in our plot has to break everybody into their sort of groups in the story. That's the mechanism that we're doing. And so in chapter 3, it's where the way the story is structured from a writing perspective is there's 4 parts to the actual story. Chapters 1, 2, and 3 are part 1. 4, 5, and 6 are part 2. And so 7, 8, and 9 are part 3. And then 11, 12, and 10, 11, and 12 are the final parts where everything comes together and sets up the next book. But right now, the whole story is driving us to chapter 6. And in chapter 6 is where things change, the plot's in motion, and in this story, the way the story is structured is the bad guys sort of win in this story. In the end of the story, Hippolyta's captured, she's taken prisoner, Diana's captured and taken prisoner along with Nemesis. And then so that's sort of how the book ends. And then Etta and Steve sort of escape this exploding tower and they end up having this massive sex. but best, basically. It's where they declare their love for each other, basically. That's the moment where Steve really falls in love with Etta in the story. Part of the overall plot in Steve arc is we know he's deeply in love with Diana, but we don't really know why he's in love with Etta other than she's friends with Diana. But in this story is where we see why he loves her and she loves him. And you start to see the triad part of their relationship in this story. And, the weird part that happens in this story is that Selene Kyle is taken hostage by Dr. Psycho in the story, and that's eventually how Diana finds her in the story. It's through just accident. Their paths crossed by accident, even though one's looking for the other. And then in this story, Helmet Striker develops Pheromone D, this chemical compound that he uses to trap the Amazons. And he makes it, after he observed the fight with Solomon Grundy, he took a sample of the sperm and vaginal fluid that was left all over the ground. He collects a sample of it, and he uses it to analyze. And he basically builds a time machine in the game, basically, or a story. But it's not, the machine he builds, he can't like step into another time period. He can only see the future. in a visual sense. He builds this technology basically that allows him to see the future, and what he sees is the Nazi loses the war. And he gets has an anxiety attack. Dr. Psycho, on this other hand, he's this guy who's developed this technology that allows him to have telepathy in the story. And so we learn that in this story that through technology, people can acquire clairvoyance. People can acquire telepathy just like the gods have. And in some respects, the Amazons in the story are sort of their battle suits that they wear, or their armor, is technology that integrates into their mind through telepathy, and it works just like a regular computer, but it's more of a thinking computer. And so the computers in these games, or this story, they're not alive in the sense that they were born. They're alive in the sense that they can talk and communicate with the Amazons. And then we sort of learn why the Amazons are connected through their girdles and their lassos, the things that connect them together, and why Hippolyta is important in the story, and essentially why Diana is important in the story. That's sort of where the story is going to end. And so this purpose of this chapter from a writing perspective is it has to mechanically break all our people into their different groups. And it sets up the plot for each individual character or group. And then it sets up what's going to occur in chapter 6. And then chapter 6 then sets up what occurs in the later half of the book. The back 6 chapter. I was going to say back 9, but that's where we are. Let's continue on.
I changed into my workout gear and put on my running shoes. I had gone out of my way not to disturb Steve, as he slept in our bed.
Also, too, this is the point in the story where Diana starts her depression. If you've been following along in the story of Diana, we learn in that story in 1950 that Diana is very depressed. And unknown to her, she doesn't realize she's depressed. She just thinks she's tired. But what's going on in the background of the story is she's depressed. And she's been depressed for a long time. But this is the first time of the story in 400 years for her that the symptoms are starting to become physical symptoms. Like she's massively tired, and she's in a lot of pain. One of the things that's going to be revealed in this story and in the story of Diana is that anesthetics don't work on her, and so she sort of has to endure all the pain she feels. And even though her body heals fast, her bones heal fast, pain and the scarring doesn't heal. And so it just keeps intensifying for her. And the way it manifests for her in a physical sense, physiology, is that she becomes massively tired. And so this is eventually how Dr. Psycho captured her in the story. It's just because she's tired. Now, originally when I wrote this story, she was going to become pregnant in the story. And that's what was going on in this story. What was going to happen originally in the story was after she fought Solomon Grundy, she was going to become pregnant. And but we didn't know who the child was either Steve's child or Cyrus Gold's child. But eventually it was Steve's child, because if you remember in the story, she had sex with both those guys on the same night. But in the lore, the immortals can't be accidentally impregnated. They can only be impregnated. They have to want to have a child to get pregnant. They can't, like a mortal where they have no idea if they're going to get pregnant or not. Because immortal women don't cycles like mortals don't have a 14-day cycle. So like mortal women. So ovulate, and they don't go through menopause. So because they're always fertile. So they can pretty much have children at will. And so, but I kind of felt it was too soon in the story to do that. I thought it was better when we broke the people up, because at some point I knew we were going to have to break the 3 people up, and I felt it was better to do that in 1945, like a month before the war ended, and that would be the thing that broke them up. Not the pregnancy, but there had to be a significant event, because the way that they are in their relationship, neither one of the 3 people in the relationship are like quitters. They wouldn't have gave up. It was going to take more than a simple misunderstanding to break the 3 people up. And the only thing that would break them up was pretty much death. So you had to figure out a way to, how do we figure out a way that everybody else thinks she's dead, but she's really alive. And then she goes to this place, and by the time she gets back, so much time has gone by because of the parallax effect. She's only lived 30 days, but everybody else has lived 5 years. And so that creates a huge complication in the story, because you're dealing with a person who's neurotic, and she accepts a lot of personal responsibility. And one of her greeds that's pointed out in the first story is her need to help people, her need to be there for her friends and help them. And so she, in Story of Diana, she figures out that it's probably best to let everything be what it is and just go on living, and just everyone thinks she's dead and no one's looking for her. So why rock the boat? It's basically what she says. And she goes off to have this child, and she basically moves on with her life, which we know in the story is something that she always does. So every 100 years or so, she moves on. So, but in this story, this is the chapter where we really begin to see her mental depression kick in. And for the people in the story that can't die, their mental disabilities become, they're very prone to mental disabilities because they have no real outlet. And you're dealing with a character that can't forget things. And her pain never goes away. And I think they would have, it would start with a mental sort of problem and then eventually manifest in a physical way. And whereas a lot of mental disabilities start as physical disabilities and eventually become mental disabilities, with her it's a mental condition which becomes a physical condition in the story. And it's what she's dealing with here. This is where it begins, basically, for her.
I turned on the radio while I had been in the process of changing my clothes. The radio man had reported that the temperature in Gotham County would be a high of 30 degrees Fahrenheit, F, and a low of 14 degrees Fahrenheit, with my clothes and shoes properly placed on my body.
Now the radio report there, that's the actual temperature that it was in Baltimore County that day, and this 16th of December. When I do my research, where I position there, why I try to put all the towns in a real place is that you can get all the weather reports. And so throughout the story, we're putting in real historical events, like the explosion of the mine in West Virginia. There's a train wreck coming up here in chapter 3 at the beginning, which is a real event. These two trains collided in 1943 in the snow. That's coming up. In this week, they're only a couple days out. General Eisenhower is appointed the Supreme Commander this week in their history. And when Hippolyta meets Diana, which is the 1st of December 1955, that's the day Rosa Parks sat on the bus. Remember? It's her famous bus incident. That's the day that occurred. And they're only a month out from Elvis Presley being shown on TV, which was January 28th, 1956. So we try to put these historical moments in the fiction to anchor it to some point. One thing I like to write in what I call the near past, so that the historical events that they're pointing out are always sort of true events, but it's in a fictional environment. The stories that we're writing are fictional. So like the sheriff in our town is a fictional guy. He's not the real sheriff of, we're actually introducing two sheriffs. There's sheriff for Clark County and another sheriff for Oconee County. And then the Indian reservation isn't a real, we had to invent that for our story. And it's not a real reservation because she ends up buying the land and she essentially makes it a Indian reservation. Because she names the resort the what she call it? The Cockney Creek Indian Resort is what she calls it. And that land was essentially all that land was part of the Creek Indian tribe prior to is it 1814, somewhere in that range, where Andrew Jackson pushed all those people off the land. 1820s or 1840s actually is when he did it. And so she goes back and buys up 500 acres of land. And it's kind of cool. One of the reasons why she's a very wealthy woman is she buys a lot of property all over the world, and basically leases the land to people, and that's how she makes her money. Basically a long term, because if you have a person that doesn't die, they're not going to be concerned with investments are only 50, 60-year investments. Her investments are 100-year, 1,000-year investments, 500-year investments. Because she's not going to die. She's not really concerned with getting her money back right away. She knows she's going to get her money back. So it's just a question of time. But she's big in the real estate investment. Yeah. And loaning money to people. And okay, let's go on.
Body, quietly, I worked my way out to the patio and waited for the others. I used the moment to stretch out my body. It may seem odd to the mortals that may read this journal to learn that immortals need to stretch their bodies out before exercise, but we do have to give our bodies a proper stretch. It is interesting how mortals imply immortality as a reason to be lazy and undisciplined. However, immortality requires more discipline and more labor to function in the society. Having read the contemporary fiction of the 1940s, I had gotten the sense that mortals believe that the immortals are just sitting around plotting murder and mayhem, when the opposite is the better description. Etta was the first to join me outside on the patio. "Good morning, Diana," she said. She gave me a hug. "Good morning, Etta."
Now in the photos here, we're getting to see Adrian and Bo in regular normal clothes. So far in the stories, we've only seen them really in bikinis or superhero outfits or real dresses. So in this part of the story, we wanted to show them in like everyday clothes, like jeans and shirts. So I had to go through a lot of pictures to find them in just everyday normal clothing. In the other scene where we had Michelle Stafford and Joshua Morrow, they play on the Young and the Restless. I'm a big, huge Young and the Restless fan, so a lot of the actresses and actors we pull from come from the Young and the Restless, CBS actors. And I kind of liked mainly because they're going to have this relationship in this story, and there's easy to find pictures of them together as a couple, both in sort of formal wear and just kick back every day sitting around the house wear. And she was actually pregnant in this story because they were on Twitter. They were their relation, they were called Vic, Vic, Phyllis and Nick Newman, and it's kind of cool. Margaret Shaw, who we have, is their child basically in Young and Restless, Summer. And I thought it would be cool in the lasso if you had Michelle Stafford as the Nemesis and Themis, and then you had Gina, who also plays the new Phyllis, as part of the lasso, which is part of Athenada's sort of group. They're always with her, and they return in Story of Diana. They show up in chapter 2, and they come to Diana because they sense her. They're closest to her than anybody in the story, even their mother. But Athena actually tells them, and they bring her the lasso, and that's how she ends up reconnecting with the lasso. Because in the story, even though it's a 30-year story for her to come back as Wonder Woman, there are different pieces of the story. She gets a little piece back of her past, sort of slowly comes back. Although it's a different past, different future, the artifacts slowly start coming back to her. And I was thinking originally having them bring her diary, but I wanted Hippolyta to be the one to bring her diary back, actually. I think it would be a more powerful symbol in the story for that. So, the diary that Diana's keeping, other than paper journal, is I thought she would grab a newer book, because the Amazon diaries are like electronic books. She can like store millions of files in there, billions of, and she can store the actual imagery from her vision into the book, so it's realistic. She doesn't necessarily have to actually write in it, but she does write because she likes writing. That's her thing, writing. Writing about people is her joy in life. Chronicling, and that's why it's called Chronicles of Time. She's the chief chroniclist in the story.
I said. I had hugged her back. My goodness, it is cold this morning, Diana, Etta claimed. She had shivered for a while as her body had acclimated to the outside temperature. I had not really noticed. Etta, I said. Etta had smiled at me. Oh, now, you are just rubbing in your immortality, Diana, she said jokingly. I laughed. Etta looked me over with an eye that detected something out of place. Are you still sore from yesterday, Diana? She asked. Yes. My lower back and my sexual organs are all still sore from being stretched to their extremes, I said. She seemed concerned. Doesn't your body heal by regenerating rapidly? She asked. It does, Etta. But my spiritual mass heals independently from my physical mass while in my physical plane body, I said. Spiritual mass? She asked. I guess this requires some explanation. See, Etta, all of us, mortal, meta-humans, and immortals have a spiritual mass and a physical mass. Our soul connects the two parts together. When we transform into our earthly bodies, we immortals consciously reduce our size to mortal standards. If we did not do this, we would affect the motion of the planet. I said. I see, that is a very interesting aspect of immortality that I did not know, Diana, Etta said. As I had completed my exposition, Hippolyta and Elizabeth had arrived out on the patio. The two women seemed to be in a calm and in a relaxed manner. Elizabeth, like Etta, had been dressed in a gray sweatsuit, which consisted of a one-piece top sweatshirt and a one-piece bottom sweatpant. Hippolyta was dressed in a pair of shorts and a t-shirt. Good morning, Mother, I said. I gave my mother a hug. Good morning, Elizabeth, I said. I gave Elizabeth a hug. Good morning, Diana, the two women said while hugging me back. Etta had greeted each of the women with a warm hug and a wonderful smile. Good morning, Elizabeth. Good morning, Hippolyta. Hippolyta and Elizabeth gave Etta a warm hug. You seem well rested, Hippolyta. Now the limitation here of the software that we're using, the Cyber Director software, is you can it only has 4 tracks. So if you have the plate sitting there with the words in track 4, and then you have the main writer of the passage on, that only gives you 2 other channels to put other people. So if you have more than 2 people doing dialogue in a scene, it's very complex, so you have to cut it all up. Or you could make that clip and leave gaps, and then when you go make another composite, add the other people in.
because when you consolidate down to one track, then you can take that, put it in track 4, and then add more stuff in later. And so one of the reasons why you do a first draft like this is you figure it tells you where you can put all your stuff in than trying to do it all in memory, which is very difficult for me. I like being able to see stuff. And one of the cool things about doing it the way we're assembling the story in frames, the plates tell you how big your frames are in terms of both a physical plate and how much time it takes to show that plate. So later on, when we go back to add the animation in, we know exactly how many plates we can fit in that frame, or how many frames we can fit in that plate, which we know with iClones, at least when I used iClones, at least at that time, it was like 38,000 frames for a 5-minute interval. So you know how long it can take to put that in there. And so I was just on a technical level, that's what's going on here with these clips. One of the reasons why I like using these still clips is it gives you a sense of later on when I'm going to have to sit down and do the animation, how it visually will look. Once we get all these chapters assembled, the next step in the process, I'm going to have to sketch out every frame on pencil paper. And so how it's going to sit in this plate, and that process is going to be time consuming because I have to basically draw the entire book out. But that'll be a really cool step in the process, which we'll be doing live online. So something to look forward to in the future.
Etta said, I did get a good night's sleep. Etta, Hippolyta said, I know, I felt you last night. Mother, I said. Mother had smiled. Well, at first, I was not really in the mood, but Cyrus managed to push all the right buttons, and I could not find the will to stop. She said, speaking of wills, don't you have a writing lesson today, Etta? I asked. Etta smiled. I sure do. Why don't you come with me, Elizabeth? Etta asked. Oh, I am not sure if I should, Elizabeth said. Etta smiled. Please come, Elizabeth. I am sure Miles would not mind.
So now we're getting to see Elizabeth, sort of more of a kickback. She's starting to exercise. Elizabeth is a woman who's had a lot of sadness in her life up to this point. It was like from the time her husband died, father committed suicide, her husband died, his father died. The depression was going on. It was during Prohibition. Her dad he made beer basically, and they had to change their company over because they outlawed alcohol. They started making soda cola. And when Diana meets Elizabeth in the story, she doesn't know that her family is the owner of soda cola. She didn't know that the Waynes absorbed that company because their mother was married to the guy. But she sort of figures that out in the story. Although it's never explicitly said, she sort of figures it out in the story. But in the last book, just out of happenstance, Diana healed up Elizabeth arthritis. She had a bad arthritis. Well, her problems came from she was having a lot of depression, and it resulted in her physical health started suffering, and she sort of developed arthritis condition. Now, the arthritis wasn't caused by the fact that she was depressed. It just sort of occurs at the same time. And it has more to do with her hereditary stuff. But if you're stressed out, and they call developmental psychology. Developmental psychology deals with both mental and physical aspects. They have what are called teratogens, and teratogens are environmental factors and environmental conditions, which when they occur, they trigger the body, kind of like cancer. If you have so many teratogens encountering the body, and if you have a physical genetic, which is more prone to the more teratogens that affect the body, your chances of getting cancer is quite high. And cancer can occur in people in a natural way, but it can also occur in an unnatural way. So for Elizabeth, her arthritis was more exacerbated or accelerated by her mental conditions. And then plus the war is going on, and then she's thrust into this company that her husband was running and father were running. And then so she wasn't really trained to do any of those things, because at the time women weren't really expected to go to college. Women weren't expected to do business things. But her husband, Alan Wayne, encouraged her to go to college. He told her that there isn't any reason why he shouldn't go to college, and that's because he knew Hippolyta in the story, and Hippolyta, through his grandfather, great grandfather, Shepherd Wayne, whatever. He that's not the right name, but Irwin Wayne, he was the one that made it so Hippolyta could get a medical license and go to a medical college in the 19th century, which was considered impossible. In the real history, there's only one woman in the United States that was allowed to even go to medical school and become a doctor. And I think that's who they based the story, Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman, on. It's that woman, which in our fiction, she's in the story. She was friends with Hippolyta. But Hippolyta was a medical doctor, because she's a medical doctor in mortal realm, which their technology is millions of years ahead of the mortal realm. So her going to medical school would be quite easy, even though it's 19th century medicine. That sort of became a thing with the Waynes. They encouraged the women to go to college and do something with your life other than sitting around. And so Elizabeth was sort of doing that, and her passion is chemistry. She loves chemistry, and she loves studying chemistry, and that's her thing. And that's why in the 1930s, the Wayne Enterprise, they went from being just a trade company, consolidations and consignments, and they started investing in chemicals. And against the the board there at Wayne Enterprise, they're not a corporation, but they're a privately owned company. They weren't really happy with that, but it turned out he saved the company, because during the Depression, all those businesses took a hit because nobody was trading. So when she moved the company into chemicals, that sort of kept the company alive, basically, for them. And they were basically developing the chemical products that other companies would use, and that's sort of what their business was about. And so when she meets Diana in the last book, Diana heals up her arthritis. She regenerates her bones, and she basically gets a renewal on life, and it restores her vitality. And so she's kind of at this point in the story, a woman who wants to basically a person who was sort of in self-prison, basically, and she's come out of this, and she's trying to renew her life, and the women were exercising, and so she wants to go along and sort of go with them. Now, Diana in the story and Hippolyta both look like they're 25 years old, even though Hippolyta is 3,500 years old and Diana's 2,800 years old. Ada is 23 in the story, so she's our young character in the story, young woman. And Elizabeth is our 40-year-old woman who's, she hasn't gone through menopause yet. She could have another child if she wants to, but she doesn't. But, and this is why she ends up having all these sort of, I don't want to call them affairs, is she learns in the story that they're hedonists. And by being hedonist, they don't really define sexuality. They don't see sexuality as sort of a commodity or a piece of property. It's just something they do. Like, you decide to go out and jog in the morning. You just do it because you like it. Or if you go fishing, it's like a hobby. For hedonists, sex is like a hobby for them. They're like, whatever. So when they sleep with men or women, it's not because, oh, I'm a homosexual or I'm a heterosexual. They do it because, all right, this seems like something fun to do. Because remember, they live in a society where no one dies. So for them, they don't have the same anxieties, or the things that gives them anxiety isn't the same as mortals. And so mortals are concerned that they could just die at any moment, right? I guess that's the biggest anxiety for most immortals. Mortals can relate to is just, at some point, you're going to die. And so in their culture, I'm not saying it's a bad or not bad, it's just a different culture. They view the concept of one, and hedonists are in a society where they view the concept of many. And they start to collide when these characters here, mainly the women in the story, at this point in the story. Now, as we add the male characters into the story in this book, you're going to see that from the male side of the characters. But at this point, Elizabeth is someone who's sort of renewing herself. She's enjoying life. She's a 40-year-old woman. She's not really old, but she's not young either. So she's a middle-aged character, and this is where her character starts becoming strong in Wayne Enterprises. In this, she leads Wayne Enterprise all the way through till the 1980s, and she's alive when Bruce Wayne is born, but she dies between the time he's born and he's 8 years old. She dies basically in the story. And then so this is the beginning of her character coming back, kind of. And this is the beginning of the story where Diana sort of goes down and Etta is sort of going up in the story. And she's learning a lot. She's getting a lot of confidence. And mainly because in the last book, 2 books, Diana's been teaching Etta, how to be a woman, basically, how to be a confident woman. And so you see Etta starting to take school serious. She's working out. She has anxieties and fears, but she's not letting them sort of dictate her life. And she's sort of becoming a strong character in the story. So when they think Diana dies in the story, we sort of, the way Etta deals with it is very different than the way Steve deals with it. For Steve, it's a very physical, personal loss, and for Etta, it's more of a spiritual loss. She's sad that she believes Diana's dead, but she's happy that because she has this internal love that she's sort of happy that Diana's found peace. But she's sad that she won't see her friend anymore, is sort of her thing. And so when they get back together later on, their sort of reunion is a very different experience than what Steve experiences in the story. And And I don't want to say that in a way that Etta's pain isn't as real as Steve or isn't as valuable. It's just different, and she deals with it in a different way. And part of that is they're sort of working together in the background of the story of Diana teaching Etta how to be a woman in the story. And Elizabeth sort of picks up on this, but in our story, where Etta and Diana are these very close people, for Elizabeth, it's her and Hippolyta become very close friends, and Hippolyta comes into the story and really teaches Elizabeth how to be a businesswoman, and sort of by trade. Elizabeth isn't really a business person by trade. She doesn't really understand business. She a chemist. She's a smart woman. She can kind of figure it out, but she doesn't really understand business, and that's what Hippolyta teaches her in the story, and that's why Wayne Enterprises in this period becomes the most profitable that it has been through Elizabeth's sort of reign at Wayne Enterprises. And it doesn't become that profitable again until Bruce Wayne starts taking over Wayne Enterprises again in the story. And that's Elizabeth's story there. Let's move on.
Etta said. Elizabeth smiled and thought to herself for a moment, "Can I take a rain check, Etta?" she asked. Etta jokingly made a sad face. "You're trying to guilt trip me, aren't you, Etta?" Elizabeth said. "Is it working?" Etta asked. "No, but I have to meet with some officials to review the final arrangements for the Wayne Foundation annual Christmas ball," she said. The revelation of the ball made all our ears perk up. "A ball?" Hippolyta asked. "Yes, the Wayne Foundation hosts a charity ball every Christmas to raise money for the children of Gotham City's many orphanages. With the war, the need for donations is high," Elizabeth said. "Is there a way for us to help?" I asked. "Well, if it is not an inconvenience, perhaps Wonder Woman would like to appear at the ball. I am sure the children would like that," Elizabeth said. I smiled. "I can arrange that, Elizabeth." "How about 5 Wonder Women?" I asked. Elizabeth smiled. "That would be fabulous, Diana," she said. As Elizabeth and Hippolyta completed their stretches, we all made our way around the perimeter of the driveway of Wayne Manor. The whole event had been about a half an hour for the jog and 15 minutes doing push-ups, sit-ups, and pull ups. After an hour, our exercise session was over. We had gone our separate ways back to our rooms to shower, change, and get ready for breakfast. Myself, I had returned to the room. Steve had awakened already and had been showering. I decided to rip off my clothes and join him.
Steve Trevor's Journal, Thursday, December 16, 1943. 45 minutes after 6 o'clock in the morning for me, the morning had come uneventfully. As I did not have anywhere to be today, I had planned to sleep in a little later than my normal routine, but my daily habits had gotten the better of me, which had made it difficult to stay asleep, so I had decided to get out of the bed and grab a shower. While I was well into my shower, Diana had come into the room to join me. I could tell by the way that she had walked into the room that she still had been sore from the battle with Solomon Grundy from the other night. I had reached out to examine her back muscles to get a sense of how tender the muscles had become. "You are still sore from the night before, Diana?" he asked.
Now here in the story, we're getting both seeing Steve and Etta are picking up that Diana isn't well. She's hiding it, and she's doing a really good job of hiding it. But looking at her, you wouldn't really, if you had never met her before, she looks perfectly fine. But they're very close to her in a deep love sort of way. And so, and her mother picks up on it too, that she's not well. And but because she's a neurotic type in the story, she's not going to burden her friends with her problems. And so she sort of takes on that responsibility for herself, because she's the heroine in the story. She has to be strong. And it's very difficult for her to share her problems. Not that she can't relay in a communicative way that she has problems. That's kind of her gregarious personality. But she's not someone who likes to burden other people with her problems. And this again begins her deeper problem for the next 30 years, 40 years for her. And she ends up in a very dark place, lonely place. And this is the beginning of her journey there. But they're picking up on it. And it continuously goes through until April of 1945. It just becomes deeper and deeper. And in this part, he's picking up on the physical symptoms. And it's sort of how depression works for most people. If you've had depression, I figure it's in a superhero sense. The way it probably would occur is that she feels normal. She's thinking normally. Her thought process hasn't changed, but her body is just physically depressed. She's mentally depressed, so her body's in a different place. And so it's manifesting in her muscles being sore, and she's lacking of energy. And we have to caution that because she's always in pain. We as the writer know that she's always in physical pain, but we don't know if the readers are picking up on this. And then through Steve and Etta, we can use them as a device to convey this sort of what's going on with this indirect method of what's going on with our heroine. Why is she sore all of a sudden? But we slowly discover that she's always sore. And it's sort of her normal thing. So for her, it's just something she's used to living with for 2,000 years.
She smiled. In the time that Diana and I have been in a relationship, and since the time we had met at Themyscira, I have come to learn Diana's subtle behaviors, brave face and best face. Although I do understand that her duty as a goddess of justice will place her at the mercy of the foes she is charged to help by the goddess Athena, there is a deep part of my spirit that does not enjoy it. My caring for Diana goes far deeper than our sexual behaviors. I could tell in my feelings that Diana was not well. Since her battle with Solomon Grundy, she had seemed quieter, and at times, she had...
This is the second time in the story that they're mentioning Diana's charges. And now, if you've read any of the books up to this point, we have not seen that in the story, but we're going to. I don't know whether I wanted to put it in this book. How I originally wanted to do it was I was going to write a separate series of books, which were all her charges. So like when you're reading the story, they're all occurring on certain days. So days that these stories aren't occurring on, she would go out in night and deal with her charges. But Steve knows that she's doing it. And one of the reasons why they weren't close, one of the reasons why she didn't want to be in a relationship early with Steve, she hesitated, was she didn't know how he would deal with that. That she goes out as an angel and her spirit are drawn to these dark spirits, and she basically has sex with them. And she's put through all these real violent we'll say behaviors or methodologies. And so her experience in the world as an angel and dealing with her charges are very violent. And a lot of those guys are serial killers and murderers and stuff. And so would Steve be comfortable knowing that his girlfriend is going out and doing this at night? And she has to do it because it's part of her duty as an angel in the society. She has to deal with, even though there's this war going on, that's not really her role in the cosmos. Her role isn't to win the war for the United States. Her goal isn't to see the Nazis be destroyed, because those are mortal things. That's for Steve to deal with. That's what his job in life is. Gathering intelligence on the enemy of the United States, basically. He's a civil servant for the United States. Well, she's a civil servant, basically, for the gods. and she works for Athena, and her primary responsibility is she enforces immortal law, natural law onto beings, but she can't do it in a way that she observes the free will of the charges she's at. She has to do it indirectly, and the way it's done in the story is that the people stalk her out basically and capture her and subject her to these cruel things, and through their indirect contact with them, she then heals their spirit. It removes all their dark energy. But what's happening in the story, and part of what's leading to her depression, is that she's absorbing all this dark energy. And over the 850 years that she's been interacting with mortals, that energy hasn't been going away. It's just been intensifying. And here in the story, we're starting to see that become a problem for her. It's always been a problem for her, but now it's really starting to become noticeable to other people. Her mother first noticed it 400 years ago, but in the last 400 years, she hasn't really been actively with people in the story. Although she's dealt with charges, she's been low-key. And part of what's going on here, we're starting to reveal to the audience what Diana really does as an angel in the story, why she's different. And Donna in the story, although she's an angel in the story, she doesn't deal with the darker side of the business. Diana deals with some really dark people in the story, and that's part of what makes her Wonder Woman in the story. And when Donna takes over the mantle as basically the champion of all the angels, the lead champ, she starts becoming very aware of this, but she slowly starts to realize she doesn't have the tools that Diana has in dealing with it. Because what Diana does is, with her empathy and her telepathy and her truth vision, is she creates these fantasy worlds that these people, she creates these illusions that the men are in. So like when the men actually capture her, tie her up and do all this stuff, it's really an illusion that she creates. And they live out that reality in their minds. And so, and through that, that's how she heals people in the story. And because it's a spiritual connection is what she's going for. And but Donna and Drusilla don't see that side of the world as life as Diana does, and Hippolyta to some extent doesn't see that. And so no one's really aware of what Athenata deals with on a daily basis, but her and Athena. And for Themis, Nemesis and Hestia know, and Athena know. But there are only really 4 people that really know what Athenata deals with on a day-to-day basis. But this is where we're starting to identify that for our audience in the story.
Seem distant. Yes, my lower back muscles feel like a big weight has been chained to them, she said. She had placed her hands up along her lower back muscles to indicate where she was stiff and sore. I had used my hands to knead her back muscles with.
I just realized it's 3:53. We're going to take a break. We're going to come right back. And do this over. Bring up my break screen. Take a break, refill my drink, and I'll come right back. All right, we're back. We're OBS Studio here. I like that new desktop. Doesn't it look cool? Yeah. Little chat bubble over there looks cool. Got it all centered in. Warning label looks cool. Yeah. Gonna have to make some adjustments for it later when we set it up for the grind. Basically gonna take this plate, copy it, copy the scene, and just make it for the grind. Then should go ahead and move that up in the playlist, because right now it's way at the bottom of the list. Should move it up in order. Yay. We haven't used our green screen in a long time. I don't want to use it, but that up here. We'll make the copy during the next session, or block 2. So, yeah, I think that looks cool. Definitely more comic book looking, huh? And the novel looks really good up there too. So let's continue on.
The hot water along with her lower spine. How does that feel? I asked. She closed her eyes as my hands pressed into her lower back muscles. That feels good. Steve, don't stop, she said. Perhaps we should take a few days off for your back muscles to heal, I said.
I guess it should be pointed out from a writing perspective that remember, we're writing in a genre called a burlesque parody, and although burlesque is a form of parody, it's important to you understand what those two parts are. With the burlesque, we're writing not from a comedic sense, writing from it's a drama. But we're taking a lighter approach to the drama. We're doing serious drama, serious topics that we're talking about in terms of mental issues and human relationships from a anthropological perspective. And we're dealing with 3 societies. We're dealing with immortals, metahumans, and mortals. And then at this point, we're dealing with 1940 United States culture, and the counterculture would be the Nazis trying to take over the world. There's some economic issues going on here in terms of the United States at this time is primarily a capitalist society, even though there's a socialist economic stuff going on. And then the Nazis are more of a I'm going to use the term fascist, but that's not really an economic term. But Nazis were socialists. That's what Nazis means. It's the Socialist Party, National Socialist Party. They were socialist. And what that means in an economic sense is that all the resources that country owns or polity owns, all the resources are owned by the government, meaning the government exercises eminent domain over all resources. Even though you're using resources to manufacture things, it's always owned by that country, or it's always owned by the state. And so even though you might be a private company in there, and they might allow you to have private ownership over those resources, scarce resources, the government can determine that if it has a greater need for those resources, that it can basically take back ownership of those resources when deemed necessary for the preservation of the state. In a capitalist society, that's very different. In a capitalist society, everything's owned by a private person. Though the government does have eminent domain, meaning at any point the government can reclaim that land. If it's not being used, they can just reclaim it for a greater need, whatever that eminent domain is. But in the United States, it's different, because in the United States, everything is owned by the people, the individual. So, and private property is recognized in a capitalist society, whereas in a socialist society, your private property is limited ownership. It's not absolute. I mean, the state can take it back at any time. And that sort of exists in a capitalist society too, but there's a greater threshold that the government has to prove in able for them to seize property that is owned by a private citizen. And so they have to show just cause, and a citizen can in turn file a court proceeding against the state to prevent that from happening. And so there are mechanisms in the polity that the private citizen has a greater say in what goes on with their property than what would occur in a socialist environment. Now, to contrast that with a communist society, in a communist economic system, there is no private property. The state owns everything. The state determines who does what. The state determines, state is responsible for educating people. The state is responsible for seeing what job you're going to do. So if the state determines that it wants more coal production, it's going to produce more people that can be the workers for coal. And if the government determines it needs more pharmaceutical, it will then reclaim resources for that production. If there are companies they'll set up companies in a communist society, but they'll be appointed by the state. The state will determine the means of production and again, it goes back to scarce resources. Who owns the resources? In a communist society, the state always owns those resources, and they see the worker as a resource. You are a resource to the state, and the state will then determine who or what that resource will be applied to, where you live, and so forth. And so there isn't any private property in that system. Now, this is different than what would be ethics. It's purely an economic model. Politics, on the other hand, deals with people's political leaning. In this society, we're dealing with anarchists and what I call orderist, or people who subscribe to liberty, not necessarily a libertarian. Libertarian is a political position, which is different than a conservative or a liberal. In political science, conservative just simply means left-leaning. And what do they call it? Left-leaning, right-leaning. So when you draw the chart that Aristotle developed, the right side of the chart are the conservatives, and the left side of the chart are the liberals. And liberal only means left, conservative only means right. In the sense, it doesn't mean that one has more value in life than the other. It just means that one believes in laws, the other does not. And the anarchist is the one who wants to govern themselves. They want to, they don't believe they have to live in anybody's rule. They're the ones who determine the rules by which they live by, which is an anarchist. And so the orderist or conservatives are the ones who believe in the rule of law. And a lot of people fall in between those 2 points. And it's a question of tyranny has a single, where does that power lie? In one individual, in a group, or in the masses, the many? The United States is a republic because power resides in the people, the mass, and they elect a oligarchy, or a limited representative government, to represent their wishes, to run the government. And those are what they call aristocrats. An aristocracy, on the other hand, is a political system in which you have a group of people that make all the decisions. They decide because they feel that they are the most educated people on the planet. They decide what's best for other people. And that's what an aristocracy is. And then you have what's called a monarchy, where you have a king or monarch who makes those decisions for the masses. That's where the political power lies. And in tyranny, you have the three systems. You have a totalitarian, which one person decides. He seizes control of the government through force, or she, and they then determine through force, through military power, they exercise political power and laws, basically. This is their rules, and here's what they are. And an oligarchy is sort of like an aristocracy, only there's no rule of law. No one is equal under law. The law is based on who holds political power, then exercises military power. And then in a democracy, which is a form of tyranny, tyrannical form of government, it's similar to a republic, other than power resides in the masses. But in a true democracy, it's sort of a thugocracy, where who holds power is through military power. They exercise their rights. Sort of like the best example of this would be Bonnie and Clyde. They were 20-year-old people who basically were anarchists, who they decided for their own military, through the force of their military power, ability to kill people. They basically stole property from other people, and that's how they lived, right or wrong. Political power is really allied with military power, your ability to enforce that power on the other people. And so in our story, being a Pearlesque parody, we're showing these relationships, and you're seeing the relationship in two basic forms. You're seeing the celestial gods who have power over the natural universe, the universe itself, and they're dealing with man's law. And in the mortal realm, man's law is based on what country you're living in. And so she's currently in the United States in 1943, where they're at war with the Axis power, and Steve is the character that represents the Allied power. That's who he's connected with, our heroine in the story. And so you're dealing with this in a burlesque sort of way. Burlesque is where you take something that is normally serious in a story, and you treat it in a non-serious way. And you take something that is non-serious and you treat it in a serious way. So in our story, we're taking these two people's relationship, which would normally be the driving force of a drama story, our hero and heroine, or protagonist in a story, or in a relationship with another person who isn't a military person. And they're basically both the same people. She's the military power of, or law enforcement mechanism for the gods. He's a law enforcement agent for the President of the United States. He's a civil servant, and he works for the Department of Defense. And he has superiors, and she has superiors. And they've both been thrown together by accident to basically his job is to rid the world of Nazis, and her purpose in life is to rid the world of to bring life back in. Her job isn't to eradicate tyranny. Her job isn't to make sure the world only exists for liberty, although she highly favors a Republican type of government. It's not really her purpose in life. Her purpose is to find balance and to keep the world in balance and to help change people one at a time that, as they grow as an individual. That's really her function. And he sort of is in that same category as she is. And so from a burlesque point of view, my talking point is that how they relate to each other is what we're dealing with, is more important than everything that else is going on in a story. So we're flipping that around, which would normally be the result of, in a superhero story, you would have our heroes would be tasked with something. They have to go out and stop the villains in the story, or the villains are trying to stop them from stopping the villains. So where that would be the normal priority of the story in a superhero story, it's not the priority in the story. The priority in this story is these two people. How do they live? How do they function with their jobs? And how do they live from day to day? And that's sort of their burlesque part of the story. And they're sort of, in 1943, in drama, this would normally be the role of the male character in the story, but it's not. In this, it's the female character who's really dealing with everything, and the male character is the support character in the story. And that's sort of what makes it a burlesque parody in our story as a writer. And that's sort of our writer connection here. We, as the writer, the creator of the story, we have to be mindful of the greater picture, the greater genre of what we're writing in. This is sort of why you are always seeing them sort of in intimate moments. And it's the intimate moments that are sort of driving our story. Our plot points are, as we go through their day-to-day business, they go do their thing, they come back, and we deal with them in these intimate moments. And that's the focus of our story. And sort of the more violent parts of the story, though they're described in the story, but they're not described in as much detail as, because I don't feel they carry as much weight in the story as how our heroines and villains relate to each other in the story in a sexual way.
Smiled. I will be okay, Steve. Besides, we are going to the Wayne Foundation annual Christmas ball, she said. I see. I have never really been to a ball, I said. It will be fun. I told Elizabeth that I will go as Wonder Woman for the children. She thinks that it will help raise money for the local charities. Hippolyta and my sisters will be going too, she said. I think that is a wonderful idea, Diana, I said, pressing my hands into her lower back. We had spent the rest of the time cleaning each other's back and washing off. A short time later, we were dressed and had made our way downstairs to eat breakfast. Manfred had given me a message from Colonel Darnell with a call-back number. As it must be urgent, I found a nearby telephone in the study to call the colonel. After a few rings, he had picked up the phone. Good, Steve. I had submitted my report to General Blankenship. I know that Diana and you are on leave, but I was wondering if you two would meet with General Blankenship and me today. He said, of course, Colonel, we will be there today. What time do you want to schedule our appointment? I asked. Let's make it for noon, Steve. He said, yes, noon it is. I will relay the news to Petty Officer Prince. I said, okay, Steve, bye. He said as he had hung up the telephone. Bye, Colonel, I said as I had hung up the telephone. I had made my way back to the dining room where Manfred had laid out the breakfast buffet. All the others had already made their way to the room and had begun their breakfast. Diana, we will be having lunch with Colonel Darnell and General Blankenship at the War Department today, I said. Of course, Steve, she said. As Diana and I had sat down at the table to eat our breakfast, Hippolyta turned her attention to Donna and Drusilla. "And, how are you two getting along this morning?" Hippolyta asked. The two women smiled. "I think that we are settled in, Mother," Donna said. "Good, if you two do not mind. Elizabeth is preparing for a charity ball this week. I need you two to work with her and help her in any way you can," Hippolyta said. She paused for a moment to collect her thoughts. "Also, I would like for you two to work out some site plans and engineering plans for the real estate that we are purchasing from Elizabeth. Alan will be able to assist you with any local zoning laws," Hippolyta said. "Of course, Mother, we will get started on that at once." Drusilla said, "If it is not too much trouble, may I assist the two ladies? I was an attorney for the county. I think a project of this kind would help me to acclimate myself to the current laws." "Of course, Cyrus, we would be happy to have your assistance," Donna said. "I will be attending a horse riding lesson at the Wayne stables this morning. I cannot say if I will be free this afternoon," Etta said. She smiled to herself as perverted thoughts went through her mind. Etta, we all who could read telepathy said together. "Man, I wish that I had telepathy," Silas said. Patrick smiled. "You and me both, Silas," Patrick said. I had to chuckle as I didn't need telepathy to know what Etta had thought. Diana smiled. "I have two friends stopping by this morning. They had heard that I was recovering from my altercation with Solomon Grundy. I sent them a letter to meet me at Wayne Manor this morning," Alan said.
Now, one of the things I'm struggling with as a writer is Alan Scott's story, and why I chose Dirk Benedict as his image is he's always been a strong character, funny character, and a male character. But DC Universe, when they did their New 52, they made Alan a homosexual man in the story, and myself as a writer, I'm uncomfortable writing that because I don't really know anything about that other than what I see on TV. But I've known a lot of people who are homosexuals in reality, male and female, early in my life. I'd say the first time I ever met a homosexual person was 1989. I think I went to a wedding. These two guys got married, and I didn't go there because I want to go see a gay wedding. I went there because they didn't have anybody go to their wedding, and I thought it would be interesting, and they invited us because we all went to this. We all were hanging out at this bar called Uncle Louis, which was I was in the Navy at the time, and Uncle Louis was right there off of the base. I don't know if he's still there, but the bartender there, they had invited us to go, and that's where we went. And I didn't really think of it as anything at the time, but I kind of challenged myself as a writer to write about an experience that his experience. I don't quite know who we're going to pair him up with in the story. Either I'll have to invent a completely new character, or it'll have to be a pre-existing character. And I don't want to deviate too much from a pre-established character in the story, other than characters that had weird sort of story arcs, like the Black Swan, Helen, in the story. She has sort of a weird story arc because she sort of was just, character was sort of just put in there to fill a gap, and so I had to recreate her story for her, and I felt, in keeping with the spirit of the character, I think we were okay, but I had to create an entirely new story for her in terms of who she was, who her parents are, what her hopes and dreams are in the story, how she got there in the story. And sort of with Alan Scott, I had to sort of do that too. He's a pretty successful guy. He's a smart guy. He's an engineer in the story, and he got into television, a radio production actually, because he's a smart guy, and that's what he invested in early in the late 19th century, early 20th century, and radio took off, and he's going to be at the forefront of television. And he's actually, through his television stuff, is how he eventually finds Athenata in the story. and how they find Athenata in the story is she's basically caught on camera giving an interview. Just guy walking along gave her an interview, and that's how they find her. Doesn't she look like because her hair is different in the story, but hey, oh my god, she's alive. And he's just a guy who understands technology, and but his dark secret in the story is that he sleeps with other guys, basically, in the story. So his struggle in the story, and in the story, everyone that's close to him knows that he's gay in the story. But I wanted to present him in a way that was not how it would be done on television or in modern drama nowadays. Nowadays, when they have a character who's I guess a homosexual in a story, it's sort of like a token character where every gay person in the story knows him. Everybody can relate to him, and I'm saying him because I need a pronoun, not Alan Scott particularly. Just saying a stereotypical person that's homosexual in any kind of modern drama, at least in the last 20 years, is pretty much the same character. It's if there's a gay person in a story, everybody knows the guy. If there's a plot in a story, he will be tied to that plot. He knows every gay person in town, basically. And I don't think that that's realistic at all. I think he's a person, he's existing, he's walking around the world. Most of the people he's going to know are because he runs a radio business, right? That's next door, that in the same building as a news organization. And they simply just occupy the same building, but he handles the radio side of everything. And so, and eventually he's going to be running the television stuff. And it's going to merge all that into the Gotham Gazette and stuff. But I think his relationship to people would be based on just his job and proximity. He knows all these metahumans because he himself is not a metahuman, he's an altered human. So he uses technology, the Green Lantern, he uses a ring, which gives him power. So, but his sort of dark side of his story is through his sexuality. And so at this point of time, the bigotry he sees. Now, I should take a step back. Every character in the story is experiencing bigotry on some level. There's no character in the story that isn't, I'm going to use the term, receiving bigotry or not transmitting bigotry. I feel at the core, every person, whether you're an organism or not, has some form of bigotry. And I divide it into what I call soft bigotry or hardened bigotry. And in our story, especially in Story of Diana, you're dealing with some characters that have hardened, blatant bigotry. They're just out there. There's no, like the Ku Klux Klan family there. They're blatant bigotry. But at the same time, it's not like they woke up a bigot. Their life experience led them to that. And his experience too in the world, his bigotry, he's a very close guarded guy. He has to be, he doesn't know who he can trust in the story, and he has to be very cautious in his life because he deals with criminals. And so he has to, by nature of his job, he has to discriminate against people. And so when they start putting together the Justice Society, now in this story, they haven't, okay, let's create the Justice Society. That's not really what happens. What happens in the story is Hippolyta buys this house for Steve, Diana, and Etta, the Brownstone estate. And Argus decides to run the operations through them, since they have all the big technology. And that's just one of the reasons why in the story Diana invites the general and the colonel out to Wayne Manor, and they see all this technology and they know they got to keep it a secret because Argus is a secret. And so they decide to move their base operations over to the Brownstone estate since it's under construction anyway, and that's what they're going to be doing. They're sort of just out of circumstances, the Justice Society is created. And what happens is the organization is created, and then eventually they give it a name. In our fiction, that's what occurs. I think that would be more realistic, because in a lot of genres and a lot of writers, just like, let's all get together and make the Justice Society, and that's sort of how it becomes. I don't think it would work that way in reality. In reality, there would be a need for it, and I think the need for it would be you have a bunch of metahumans running around, and the law enforcement, even though there's metahumans that work for law enforcement, they don't know how to deal with it. How do you officially deal with that from a government sort of way? And so in this period, people are recognizing, senators, representatives, lawmakers, and law enforcement agencies are really recognizing that this is something they need to deal with. And Argus becomes that mechanism for the United States government. And eventually Argus is pulled into the United Nations. When the U.S., in our story, when the U.S. starts to help create the United Nations through the State Department, that's sort of where Argus sort of becomes both an entity of Department of Defense, the CIA, and the State Department. They sort of become this mechanism between all these three government departments. Now, I believe the Department of OSI or OSS, which was prior to the CIA, the way I understand it, they were technically a different department, but during the war, they were branched up with Department of Defense. And then after the war, it sort of splinters off. But in our fiction, Argus is going to become that mechanism. And then the Justice Society is basically their public face. Because they can't go out and just say, hey, we're just a secret organization of superhumans. No, what they do is they have to give it a name. They recognize that people need to see the heroes. They need to see these symbols. And that's sort of what Batman becomes. And but through Argus, the Justice Society becomes the public face of their organization. He is one of the key people in the founding of the Justice Society, and that's sort of his role in the story. And the way we're going to portray him, the way I want to portray him, is as a person. He's this guy trying to do... He's good at organizing things. He's good at developing systems because he's an engineer. And in the story, he's just happily gay in the story. And how we pair him up with other people, I don't know at this point. I kind of wanted to put him in a relationship in the story. Well, because when you're writing a story as the writer, you're creating all these relationships, so they're all manufactured. But I like to do it in a way where it's more organic, something that would be more realistic. If a person's reading this and they identify with this character, I think it would be better if they say, hey, this is just an everyday guy. He's, just making the decision and he's kind of having it rough. But I kind of want to do it in two ways. His character arc, as we have established in the previous book, he's an outgoing guy. He likes sex. He's sort of more of a hedonist, but he just doesn't know it. And when he meets the women, Hippolyta and Diana, and his eyes are open to these guys are hedonists, and he's never really thought about life in that way. He could live openly, and he starts, I don't want to say dreaming of that reality. He's more or less, he starts to look at life in a different way than what he's currently doing. It's hard for his character to do that. And so when he meets Hippolyta, she really treats him like a normal person. She's very open about his sexuality, and they start double dating. And what he does is he takes Hippolyta out. What I want him to do is, his real problem in meeting other people, other men, is he doesn't know really what to do. He doesn't know how to do that. And so he takes Hippolyta, and I kind of want him to do it with Donna and Drusilla in this story, where he goes out to these gay bars, basically gay establishments, and he uses them to help learn how to hook up with other people. And I think that would be a realistic thing for our hero in the story. That here's this guy with all this power. He could do anything he wants, basically, right? But he can't connect with other people. I think it's funny that to have that. And I think that's anybody, even if you're not following his particular story arc, can relate to that. He just doesn't know how to relate to other people and sort of ask for that. He doesn't know how to do that. And which is kind of funny because his character's whole business is connecting other people. He runs a business, right? A radio station. And his whole job is to communicate to other people, and they listen to what he's broadcasting, right? So when he switches to television, his sole job is communicating. But one of his flaws is he doesn't know how to connect with other men in the way that he wants to. He doesn't know how to verbalize it. And through the women, the Amazons in the story, he learns that. Now, it's not going to be something that he learns overnight. Like, oh, okay, well, I'm glad you pointed it out to me, and I'll do that from now on. No, it's something that he's got to overcome. He has a lot of anxiety because he knows what he thinks he should be doing in his head, but he doesn't really know what to do. And I think what I should do in the story is invent another character for him. That way, it gives us a character to explore, a character to learn new things from, and it doesn't have to be a token type character, or you don't have to take another character and reinvent them for him. Because when you're dealing with superhero fan fiction, or fiction for that matter, people, even if it's the most minor character on the planet, people have a connection with those characters. And when we changed Black Swan's character up, I felt it was for the best, because I didn't like, every time we see the Black Swan in sort of the story, she's just this crazy woman who's got a lot of anger issues, and she never resolves her anger issues in the story, or she never deals with it. And I thought it would be a better story if the person she has the most anger with, Athenata, in the story, is the person that helps her find her way back. And not necessarily give her confidence, but realize that her problem is really in her head. Her issues with Athenata, for the most part, is in her head, because Athenata didn't steal Steve Trevor away. He willingly went, and Steve Trevor didn't know that this woman loved him. She never expressed her feelings because she was afraid. She was a young girl, and then until she became a metahuman, she didn't really have a whole lot of confidence in herself. And through her metahuman power, she gains confidence. And when she realizes that Athenata is alive in the story, she sees her as a threat. She believes that she's the one person in the world that can take Steve away, because she was there when he went through dealing with the death of, when she thought she was dead, and she felt that he would go back to her because she feels that his love was stolen away from him, and he never got over that. And when she realizes Diana's alive, she can't deal with that, and so she goes off. She tries to kill Athenata, but she realizes that she can't. And I think it's more of a heartfelt story. I like the idea of giving the Black Swan sort of her Black Swan moment, and that she comes back in the story. Him too, I like that he, not really coming back in the story, but I feel in his relationships with other men in the story, he sort of has a dark sort of path he's going down. he doesn't really know who he can trust, and he doesn't want to be in a relationship just by happenstance, or buffoonery. He wants to be with someone because he actually cares for the person, and he doesn't know how to communicate that to another person in a verbal sort of sense. That creates a lot of problems with him. And I was saying that as a writer, I struggle with that, because when you're building these relationships for these characters, I personally don't sit down and just we'll put these two people together. We'll put these two people together, and then we'll put these two people. I have to sit down and think about, like, him, who his parents were, who his mom and dad, what kind of talks they would have, who his close relationships are with. And in his story, he's really good friends with Steve. He's really good friends with Jay Garrett, and he's really good friends with Sean Jones. So they're all three very strong male characters in the game, and they all know he's gay in the story, and they don't seem to have a problem with it, and they just treat him like a everyday guy, which, in my experience, that's how it is in real life, I think. But when you see it on TV, it's completely just, who lives that way? Who talks that way? And I don't like that. I don't like presenting my characters in that way. I don't think people can connect to that on any level. It's just silly. So I think Alan, from this point on chapter 2, he grows as a character in the story. He takes on a bigger role in the story.
You seem distant, Diana. Are you feeling okay? Hippolyta asked. Diana smiled. I am okay, Mother. I am still sore from the other night, Diana said. Hippolyta looked concerned. Oh, perhaps you should spend some time in the medical bath, Hippolyta suggested. Maybe later, after we get back from our appointment, Diana said. Diana smiled. Will you be investigating the whereabouts?
Now this is where Hippolyta splits off from the rest of the group. She's going to go off on her own little story plot, and part of this is, if you read a lot of modern Wonder Woman stories, you only really see Hippolyta in the first book, usually, when they reintroduce Wonder Woman. No matter who writes the story, it's always, you see Hippolyta, she's this big, major, important, and you never see her ever again in the story. Or they make mention of her once in a while. And then so we never really get to learn, and I always wanted her to be someone who's central to Diana's life, and sort of the mother-daughter role, and they're really close. And I don't know if people can relate to this. They're both, she's 2,800 years old, and Hippolyta's 3,500 years, and they're both kind of can relate to each other in that way, both as a mother-daughter and as angels. And they sort of need each other in the story. They feed off each other. Hippolyta feeds more off of Diana than Diana feeds off of Hippolyta. And Hippolyta sort of needs Diana in her life because Diana's power of empathy is very strong. And she has a way of just taking people's dark energy away and absorbing it. And just, it's intoxicating for a lot of people. And it's when she's gone, the people closest to her don't realize it until she's gone, that she has this effect. And so when she is gone from their life, all these characters are sort of lost, kind of lost souls, basically. And though they're together and they stay with each other because they're sort of family, they are not the same until she comes back. But Hippolyta in the story is a wild woman, and her daughter is sort of her centering. The person who centers her, or she finds centering, is her daughter. And Athenatus, Hippolyta really isn't her centering character. Athena is more of the centering character for and Hestia is more the centering character for Athenata, but Hippolyta is really the person she draws strength from. She finds the will to sort of just keep moving on, pressing forward. And tomorrow will be another day type of thing. And that's sort of what Hippolyta is to Diana in the story, and their Athenata. And in this story, we really get to see the growth of Hippolyta. And Hippolyta, we get to see her life as an angel and what she does. And she goes off to find her friend, Margaret Shaw. She was murdered, and she didn't know where her friend was. And she feels guilt, a lot of guilt, that she's alive and her friend died. She had reason that Margaret had died, but she didn't know she was murdered. She suspected it, but she didn't know. And so when Athenata reveals that truth to her in the beginning, chapter 1, she's traumatized by it. And Hippolyta loved Margaret Shaw in the story, even though they weren't lesbians or anything in the story. They just loved each other. And Hippolyta was the older woman, and Margaret was the younger woman, but they were sort of the same person. And Margaret Shaw is sort of the Etta Candy for Hippolyta. Someone she had a lot of respect for, she loved on a deep level, and she lost her along the way, and she regrets that loss. And so Hippolyta is going off to deal with it, and this is where we meet I Ching. I Ching works a lot with Hippolyta in our stories. When she's traveling around in her Western stories in the 19th century, he travels around with her, and Hippolyta ran a lot of brothels. And what she would do is she would go to these small towns and she would set up shop. And she was really a medical doctor, but in those times, people didn't really see women as medical doctors. So to overcome bigotry, she created these brothels, these brothels, and she would hire the girls. And she didn't force people into prostitution. However, for a lot of women, that was the only way for them to make money at that time. And what she would do is she would provide the medical care for the prostitutes. She would make their clothes, educate them, help them go to college, retire, how to set up property so that they could go on and be successful women in their life. And that's sort of what she does in the 19th century, and how she conquers the West. And Hippolyta knows a lot about the American history because she's lived it as a person. And so she actually is a U.S. Marshal in the story, and a law enforcement agency. But she's been on leave since 1895, basically. And this is her sort of coming back moment. Her and Athenata are sort of coming back in this story, and they both were sort of, when they go back to Themyscira in the end of 1890, they're sort of lost characters, and they're sort of people who are re-examining their place in the world at that time. It takes them about 50 years to re-examine. And we learn in story of Diana, it takes her 40 years to overcome her depression. But Hippolyta, this is sort of her coming back in the story. But she wants to know what happened to this girl. And so her story is she goes and finds her friend, and it turns out her friend has a dark history that she didn't know about, but she discovers this along the way. And it's kind of an interesting story, because where the story ends is she ends up being captured and imprisoned, and basically made a slave. And Diana too ends up captured because Hippolyta ends up captured. And in this story we learn about why the Amazons are interconnected in the story, how they're interconnected in the story. And it's kind of a cool thing. It's almost 5 o'clock, so we're almost halfway through this. So
Of Margaret Shaw.
probably going to end up doing
Diana
the intermission
asked,
at 5.
Yes, I will have to pay a visit with Lord Hades to acquire some information, Hippolyta said. Diana, Donna, and Drusilla sighed at the mention of Lord Hades. Is there something wrong about Lord Hades? Elizabeth asked. Hippolyta smiled. Well, Lord Hades is very pleasant. It is just he always expects his payments up front, and he and his wife, Persephone, are always throwing these wild parties. Hippolyta said, I feel sore all over just thinking about it, Mother. Drusilla said, I know. Hippolyta said, the rest of the morning had been rather peaceful as all of us went about with our breakfast. Once completed, all of us went our separate ways for the morning. Diana and I had returned to our room to get ready for our appointment at noon. Letter to Helmut Stryker, December 17, 1943, 9 o'clock in the morning. Colonel, I have received your letter via the secure radio transmission. After reading your field report on the Solomon Grundy matter, I concur with your analysis of the situation. High Command has advised me to refer you to a local expert in the occult science in your area. He is Dr. Edgar Sisko, a renowned scientist in his field of study. He will meet with you today at your field office at 12 o'clock in the afternoon, Eastern Standard Time. General, Journal of Edgar Sisko, December 17, 1943, 9 o'clock in the morning. This morning, I had received a message from my assistant to visit a local physicist.
Sorry, I didn't realize the mic was on. But here we meet the antagonist in the story. Actually, two antagonists in the story, but he's the main one. He's the one who's tasked with capturing Wonder Woman in the story. He's our occult specialist that Dr. Helmut Stryker hires. Helmut Stryker is unsatisfied with the help that he's getting with Selene Kyle, and part of his frustration with Selene Kyle is his own internal bigotry. He doesn't want to be held back by some woman. He doesn't trust women. He doesn't see them as equal in society. Dr. Helmut or Edgar Sisko, he has a lot of hatred for women, but it's not at the same sort of way that Helmut Stryker does. For Helmut Stryker, it's more of a knowledge sort of way. He sees men as superior in knowledge and scientific way. For Edgar Sisko, on the other hand, it's more of a personal reason. His girlfriend basically betrayed him for another guy in the story, and he ended up going to prison, basically, and his wife or girlfriend basically set him up. And this other guy murdered this guy, and they blamed him. So he ended up in prison as a young man who has had a very promising future, but he was, I don't want to say publicly shamed, but he was, Edgar Sisko in this story is a self-made man. He had to learn the hard way how to grow up. He basically raised himself out of the gutter, and he educated himself, and he likes to learn. He believes through his own power, he can achieve anything he wants as long as he focuses his mind. And he studies occult science. He studies like telepathy and metahumans, and he spent a lot of time studying metahumans. He's never met an immortal in a story. And one of the confounding elements of our antagonists in the story is people don't believe immortals exist. They think they're just metahumans. So, he has created this technology that he basically, I call it an octo chamber thing, which is basically it holds 8 people, and when the people are in the little chamber, it traps their souls, and he feeds the equipment that he builds, basically taps the energy from their soul, and it gives him power. And his power is through telepathy. The mechanism he built gives him extreme mental control. And so he learns how to take natural energy from the cosmos and channel that through his mechanisms to give him the power of telepathy. And this is why he's able to, I don't want to say rival Athenata in the story, because Athenata's power is greater than his in the story in a measurable way. But he comes to his mental power in a very short period of time. And he can manipulate energy to feed more power. But for him to maximize his power, he needs 8 subjects to give him the power he needs. So his first person he captures in the story is his wife. He basically captures his wife and makes her a slave, basically, and she is what's powering his telepathy in the story. But his power is again through technology and not his actual mind. It's not an inborn power. So he's not a metahuman in the story. He's an altered human in the story. Same as Alan Scott in the story. But whereas Alan Scott found this alien artifact and he uses that to power himself, his power is self-created. He creates the power using other people. And so he wants to capture Athenata. Through his study in the story, he discovers that Athenata is not a metahuman, that she's a different kind of organism, and this fascinates him. Even though he hates women in the story, he doesn't believe women are superior to him. His bigotry is different than Helmut Stryker's bigotry. Now, Edgar Sisko is a very intelligent guy in this story, and as he draws more energy through his power, he gains more intelligence. Athenata is the same way. Her intelligence is like 200 something, but as she uses more of her power, because she's 28 standard deviation from the normal anatomically modern human, her intelligence is 28 times that of a normal human being. So his intelligence at most would be 15 times. He would never be greater than a Titan, but it's still a lot of power. So he ends up capturing Athenata in the story by accident. And what happens in the story is that going forward, he captures Selene Kyle in the story through the help of Dr. Stryker. And he uses Selene to power his, and Selene has a lot of power. She's not 100 years old, but she's in the metahuman class 4 range of power. And he starts to capture all these people through his telepathy and deception. And he ends up capturing Athenata in the story. And originally how I wrote the story was Nemesis finds out that Athenata was pregnant, so she switches bodies. Secretly, she switches body with Athenata, and she puts Athenata in this orb so that she can heal. And so nobody in the story knows this, but Nemesis. And what Nemesis was going to do is she was going to live through all these things that he puts her through. But in reality, Nemesis is just an illusion that Nemesis is creating in the story. Because she wants to see how all this plays out, but I've since rewrote that. I thought it would be more powerful if Athenata gets captured, and then her and Nemesis sort of work together to, that's how she ends up becoming free. But they turn the tables on him in the story, and they thwart his plans. But what happens, the twist at the end of the story is that Hippolyta ends up being captured by Margaret Shaw and the incubus in the story, the demon in the story. And when they capture Hippolyta, they take her girdle of Gaia, and the girdle of Gaia is what connects all the Amazons together. And so by doing that, by enslaving the queen, he enslaves all the other Amazons, and he basically has them go to sleep unconscious. And that's why when they're thwarting his plan, they fall unconscious. And then and he gasses them with chloroform. And then because he's able to capture Athenata, and she commands the lasso, and he in turn is able to capture the the goddesses in the lasso because Athenata commands them. And so that sets up the story for the next book. The next book is supposed to be called The Ties That Bind. And so it's sort of the story. Our heroes start off in a dark place in the next book, but I kind of wanted to have this story where the villains win in the sort of story. And this begins the progression of how what's her name? Paula von Gunther comes back in the story. It's through Edgar Sisko in the story. Now, I was debating on who I was going to have be Edgar Sisko, because Sisko is actually a Russian descent, right? Slavian type descent. So Eric Braeden's German, and so I was wondering whether we should have a German play a Russian character, and I couldn't think of a person to play Edgar Sisko in. Where we have changed Edgar Sisko. Edgar Sisko is normally portrayed as this little dude, ugly dude, and sort of, I wanted to make him a good-looking guy, but what makes him ugly in the story is the things that he does. His hatred in the story is what makes him an ugly person in the story. And I kind of wanted to have him be this German guy who, he's lived in the United States, but he survived in World War I when he was a young man, before he went to prison. He had to survive in this world where they were paying retributions to the Allies, and so his hatred in the world sort of grows from that. But his true hatred comes, his pathology to hatred comes from, he was in prison, and he had a lot of terrible things happen to him in prison. And that sort of fueled his hatred. And so he imprisons a lot of people in the story because that's sort of what happened to him. So he wants people to understand his pain, and that's sort of the catalyst of his anger comes from that. And I picked Eric Braeden because he was in the pilot for Wonder Woman. He shot down Steve Trevor. I liked him. I used to watch The Rat Patrol, and I watched Young and the Restless, and he's on there. He's awesome, Young and the Restless. But he's always been a great actor, and I felt he could give Sisko, from an image point of view, the gravitas that we needed for Edgar Sisko, because he needed to be a little bit more... He definitely is more intelligent than Stryker. Stryker is more of an engineer, whereas Edgar Sisko is really a scientist. And we needed to have that in the story, and I kind of liked him. We're going to pause this here because it's 2 minutes after 5. We're going to pick up this tomorrow on fan fiction. begin with Edgar Cisco and his story and learn more about him. So let me go ahead and pause this. Minimize that. Put this back on our playlist. While that's changing out, I'm going to stop this and restart it.